The following program is a PodcastOne.com production.
From Hollywood, California, by way of the Broken Skull Ranch, this is the Steve Austin Show.
Give me a hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Now, here's Steve Austin.
All right, everybody, welcome to Steve Austin Show. I'm coming to you from the mean streets of Los Angeles, California, 316 Gimmick Street. I'm in my office where I open up 2 cans of Audio Wolf Ass each week for free for you people. And when I'm at home, this is where I do my work out of, my office. We're doing my family-friendly show. What do you think about that?
This is family-friendly?
Yes, it is.
I guess you better have that 7-second delay on.
I wanted to be able to slug through this. Yeah, I see what you did there. Hey, let's treat this, and I'm recording all this. This is what happens, actually, when 2 guys who were former travel partners and very good friends in the business just get on the phone and talk. And we're going to talk about wrestling. Right. But, when I started going over your career, dude, you lasted, some 30-odd years in the business. I said, you know what? I need a podcast to turn in for Tuesday. Wouldn't do any justice to you or your career to specifically get into, all the great angles that you were in. And I thought we'd skim along the surface of the business and talk about a few issues that were prevalent in the business, things that you went through. And we're not going to go into any heavy detail, but talk a little bit about some drugs. But, dude, where exactly did you grow up? Because right here, you went to the University of Delaware. I never knew. Did you get a degree? Yeah.
I got a criminal justice degree, and then I took a semester off of college to go into the Marine Corps, and then I went back to college. And instead of being an officer, because I didn't want to, because then I have to do active duty, which I didn't want to do. I just wanted to go to boot camp and see how tough I was. So after boot camp, I went to infantry school, and then I went back to college in the fall, and then I just had to do 6 years of reserve duty, basically.
Dude, what were you going to do with a criminal justice major?
Oh, I was going to be in the FBI, the DEA, the CIA, I don't know.
But somewhere along the way, you got sidetracked in the wonderful world of professional wrestling. When did you first start watching the business? Because, you and me used to travel together back in our WCW days, and we called ourselves the Comedy Trio because it was yourself, me, and the one and only Flying Brian Pillman. Plagued by bad service wherever we went, to all the restaurants we went to, renting those Chevy Lumina vans, and we had the times of our life. But going back to your early days, I started watching in Texas at 7, 8 years of age, and I bought in. It was real to me. Tell me how you were introduced into the business and what to you said, because you're one of the smartest guys that was in the business that I consider, up there with Cactus Jack. I always enjoyed Mick Foley's opinions on stuff. But when did you first start watching the business, and when did you fall in love with it?
As long as I can remember. When I grew up in Philadelphia until I was about 9. So I remember, so I was there. So what was that? In the early 70s when Chief Jay Strongbow was at his peak, and I remember Sonny King was a babyface, which, I'd never heard of him again anywhere else, hardly, except then it turned out to be like a heel manager later on. He was like a big black guy, but he wore like a loincloth and as a babyface, and what else? The Fuji and Tanaka were the tag team champions. They're always, in their running, whatever. I think when I thought it was real when I was about, 6, 7, and then I was disabused of that notion, and pretty soon came, it's kind of how I figured out there was no, Santa Claus wasn't real, which is actually kind of a silly story, but, so one day I go to my mom, I go, reindeers can't fly, can they? And because I figured that reindeers can't fly, that Santa Claus must be a fake. It wasn't that he could deliver packages all night all over the world and get everybody right, and just get it done. And it wasn't the fact that he lived in the, in the North Pole, had a house on the pole, with reindeer and, and one reindeer had a blinky red nose. And there was, there was more holes in that story than Swiss cheese, but, but the thing that tipped it for me was the reindeer couldn't fly. I was like, reindeer can't fly. So I'm not buying this nonsense.
Got to tap out on the gimmick. That was always interesting because you bought into the fact that Santa Claus could indeed deliver all these packages down all these chimneys. And we only had one house that had a chimney. But, you couldn't get FedEx, UPS, and all the other gimmick package delivery services on a page to deliver all that stuff. It was
back then.
I know, but it was a novel idea.
Yeah, I'm saying, but they didn't even have that. So I couldn't even think that. Well, maybe he FedExes them to everybody. And they just, and the post office plays along, and, it's like, that didn't factor into my theory.
But did y'all ever do the gimmick, like, where, make some chocolate chip cookies or whatever, and then put the gimmick glass of the milk in there, and, of course, somehow, some way, like either one or all of the cookies were eaten or a bite was taken out of them, some of the milk was drunk, and then I was like, man, Santa Claus stopped by, man.
Well, that explained why he was so fat, because he had to eat a bite of cookies, man.
But you got to figure, as somewhere along the way, he would have come across one of the boys, and they would have gimmicked up the chocolate chip cookies with X-Lax, and then it could have made for a real interesting story. I mean, he could have been flying over, Hoboken, New Jersey, taking off from your place, and like a crippled goose.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, at what point did you decide to say, "Man, I'm going to go to wrestling school"?
It's a really silly story, but
dude, that's all I got time for is silly stories. That's what a podcast is. What was it? I realized it. Well, actually, I also considered going to law school, but I realized that I really had no interest. Like, I never had a study in high school. Yeah, you get to college, and all of a sudden, you go from I was seventh in my class in high school, and that was without studying. And then now I got to go to college, and all of a sudden now I got to study just to get B's and C's. You know what I mean? Well, not study, but barely study to get B's and C's. Right.
Like, if I would have worked at it, I could have got A's, but that wasn't happening. And so, so I was like, man, I'm not going to law school. This isn't for me. And so I had always loved wrestling, and it was just like, I don't know. I mean, I just figured I'd want to do it before I'm 50. I don't want to be 50 years old, but I'm 51 now. But I didn't want to be 51 years old going, man, I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have tried, man. And so I figured I'm better off trying and failing. Well, not failing, trying and being unsuccessful than not trying at all. And because the guy who sits on the couch is the failure, Right. The guy, if you try and you're unsuccessful, you're just unsuccessful. But it doesn't make you a failure, because to me,
you had the guts to try.
People, I've always told guys, I've always had a flock or a crew of people or whatever, and I've always told them, I said, look, I don't care. Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to look back at my life as going, man, what did I do with it? Here was an avenue I really wanted to explore, but I was too scared to try. I didn't want to be that guy. I mean, that's also why I went in the Marine Corps. I wanted to see how tough I was. It's like, you want to know that you're, I'm not the toughest guy in the world by any stretch of imagination, but, you want to know that if the world's coming to an end, you can defend yourself and your family. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, you were. Let me step in here. You were tough enough to make it through boot camp, and so you went through the reserve duty. But and proving that you could go through boot camp, it showed some level of toughness. Did that validate you as a person? What did you think about that?
That's a whole long. There's so much more to that story. I was saving that for my book, but which I'm going to write. I got about 5 pages done. I've been working on it for 17 years. No. But yeah, there was a lot of reasons why I felt like I needed to validate myself, but career-wise, I wanted to be fulfilled, I always loved wrestling. I remember when I was a kid one time, me and my buddy were wrestling, and when we were like 7 years old, and I put him in an arm bar in a hammerlock. And then all of a sudden he was crying. Because kids aren't going to, tap to each other, or stop. All of a sudden he starts crying, and then he was all mad at me. And I was like, man, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to, do whatever, and counter it or something. I didn't know. And but But I wanted to give it a shot, and I figured, look, if I'm unsuccessful, I'm unsuccessful, But I also made sure that when I left, by then after living in Philadelphia, I moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin for a year. So I saw the AWA, and which I got a funny little story about Dusty as a fan. And then within a year later, we moved to Florida, and when I was 12, and so I grew up in West Palm Beach, in my high school years. And so we watched Florida Championship Wrestling, which was just awesome. Just a really great wrestling show. But I was when I was in Milwaukee, Dusty Rhodes was a heel. He was a bad guy.
Yeah.
Him and I guess Dick Murdoch were tag partners. And so but I guess he was flying back and forth. So within 3 months or 6 months, he's in Florida as a babyface. So I moved to Florida, and we lived like 2/3 of a mile from the West Palm Beach Auditorium, and so all the local kids would walk to the auditorium every Monday night because they had it every Monday night there, and it was like $3 a ticket. But if the world champion was there, it was 50 cents more because championship prices were in effect.
I love it.
So everybody's like, man, there's this guy, Dusty Rhodes, you'll love him. I'm like, I don't like him at all. He sucks. 11-year-old kid, like just, they were like, blowing him, and I'm just, I'm just like, man, you guys are stupid. You don't know anything. He's a bad guy. And then like 2 weeks later, I'm like, I love it.
What was it about Dusty that because one time when I've told the story many times, but I'll tell you again. I was 7 or 8, and we were living in Edna, Texas, and I was watching wrestling, and it was Sam Houston Coliseum, and someone, I can't remember, had Dusty Rhodes in Iron Claw. And Dusty was bleeding like hell, and a security guard was strolling real slowly around the ring, and the lights were turned down pretty low, old school effects. And he had
they just had the lights over the ring. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, dude. Back when the atmosphere was killer. So anyway, I look at my mom. She's reading her book, and the security guard actually has a firearm on his hip. And I said, Mom, why didn't the security guard help Dusty? Because, boy, I thought it was a shoot. So, but Dusty, and tomorrow night I'm going to host or do the Q&A thing for the Jake the Snake, Resurrection of Jake the Snake thing here in Culver City. But Jake was the reason I got into wrestling. Dusty was the reason I got into wrestling. Flair was, too. What was it about Dusty that captured you? Because I liked his moves, and this was me as a young kid. At the time, I wasn't able to appreciate the words in his promos. I appreciated the lisp and the cadence, and they almost hypnotized me on an audio level.
The cadence, absolutely. It was the lisp and the cadence, and the body language that he did with it. But just the fact that you use those terms is part of the reason why you're the Stone Cold Steve Austin and not Joe Jabroni, with a podcast with 8 people, because you are like, to me, it's amazing. Not to change the subject, but it's amazing. Like guys will go through this business and they'll work on this moves, and I'll give you an exact example. Like Elix Skipper's a great kid. I really like him, and he did the single most amazing move in the history of wrestling. In my opinion, the TNA, they actually had like a 10 or 12 foot cage or 15 foot cage. They actually had like a really super high cage, and Daniels and somebody else were sitting on the top of it fighting, and he actually walked the top, like like the Undertaker walks, the top rope. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He walked the top of the cage, but there's nobody holding his hand. Walked the top of the cage, and then Frankensteinered Daniels or somebody off the top of the cage. But nobody heard about it. Nobody cares about it. It's not a thing anybody talks about. Greatest move, and I've never seen. I don't think it's possible to beat that without seriously taking a chance of screwing yourself over. You know what I mean?
Right.
But have you ever seen that move?
No. Who was doing this?
You have to. Elix Skipper did it.
No.
The cage had to be like the cage legitimately had to be. What are these short ones? 8 foot, 10 foot. So that had to be 15 foot. And he's standing on top, so his head, where his eyes are, is like 20 foot up. And he climbed up in the corner, and then Daniels and them had shimmied out to the center, and whoever he was punching with, I guess. So so Elix walked on, like a balance beam, walked the top of the cage, and then Frankensteiner, I think both of them, or at least one of them off the top. And of course, it wasn't the finish or anything. Why would it be?
Yeah, but is the point you're trying to make the way Dusty talked and moved and captivated the crowd?
My point. Let me come back to it. So my point being is that Elix all the time would work on his moves and his moves and his moves. I'm like, dude, that if you have 5 good moves, that's all you need. I consider sitting in the corner one of my moves.
Yeah,
you don't need that many moves. What you need is to develop a persona, a character. And it's like, if he would have been, if he could have developed or would have developed a personality to match his athleticism, wow, unbelievable. I mean, he could have, he could have been Rey Mysterio before Rey Mysterio, but, you know what I'm saying? He could have been the small guy well, I guess it was after Rey Mysterio, but he could have been a small guy that had jumped to a next level, but a smaller guy. But he never worked on the character, and I'm like, why do you spend so much? It just drove me up a wall that he would spend so much time working on the attribute that, let's face it, in all honesty, is the single least important part about wrestling, is the actual wrestling. And people might hate that I say that, but the people that spend the money, the casual fans that make up the real box office, they're there for the entertainment. They're there for the showmanship. They're there to see Dusty with his cadence and his lisp and the flip-flop and fly. And
they want to see that larger-than-life character, go in there and do what they do. And when you go back to Dusty Rhodes and you're talking about the fancy high-flying moveset that the other guy had, when you think about Dusty Rhodes, you're thinking about classic, grab a body part, work the body part, and then, just the magic stuff. Bionic elbow. Dude, when he used it to start dropping bionic elbow, especially in the tag when heels are feeding in, and he starts dropping that bionic elbow, and then he does that, I call it the snake charmer, where he rolls his hands together and rears back and delivers that trademark bionic elbow right in the guy's forehead, and the dude takes a big flat back, quick bump for him. Dude, and then he shakes his hips and moves backwards, and it just turns that charisma on, and the roof blows off the place.
And that's what's really interesting, the other Dusty thing, his selling. He knew how to sell, when you were getting over, there was another guy that got over so big who did absolutely nothing, who has a move set of 2 moves, and he knows it. He'll tell you that. It's the Road Dogg. The Road Dogg has the shimmy, 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 and the knee drop, and the shimmy, shimmy, whatever, jabs.
Yeah.
No, I guess the shimmy, jabs, and a knee dropper or whatever. It's a very small move set. And he'll tell you, but because he learned from his dad, all he does is sell. He goes, all right, I'm going to hit my 2 moves and then cut me off and beat me up. Get some heat. And people get behind it,
Paying out of your own pocket for gear you need to do your job is a problem. All kinds of departments across the nation, police, fire, EMS, medical workers on the front lines, and even military units, they all deal with constrained budgets and outdated gear. But there's still a job to do, and you need the gear to do it. Hunting for military, first responder discounts has historically required going from one website to another and all kinds of hassle. Don't you wish there was one place you could visit that had a carefully crafted selection of deals for military first responders in one spot? GovX works directly with brands to negotiate the best prices possible because you deserve the gear you need at the prices you've earned. Plus, you can trust that the gear you're ordering is 100% authentic, direct from the manufacturer. If you must pay out of your own pocket, you shouldn't have to pay a premium to get the gear you need to effectively perform your duties and complete your mission. GovX has a huge collection of gear and apparel from popular brands, all in one convenient location. It's like a grown man's toy store in here. Just wait until you see our knife collection. All you need to do is sign up for free. No subscription fees. No re-up in your membership every year. Once you're approved, you're a fully fledged GovX member for life. GovX honors your service and gives back to your communities. We don't just thank you for your service, we honor it. So if you're an American of service, a current or former member of the military, firefighting, frontline medical, or law enforcement communities, or the emergency medical, join GovX for free and enjoy a community that honors and gives back to patriots like you. If you've got a military or first responder background, visit govx.com and sign up for free for instant access to tons of deals and a community that honors your service. Visit govx.com and receive $15 off first orders over $50 or more when you use code STEVE. That's $15 off first orders over $50 or more when you use code STEVE at govx.com.
One time when I was Johnny Polo, I was working Virgil, and and I actually got Virgil to. I actually got people to chant. Of course, it was the other way, because if you have enough steam on you as a heel, you can also cause the same effect. But I actually got the people to chant "Go Virgil, go," which I think probably was the first.
Right.
You know, nothing. I thought that might get a bigger pop, but it didn't. But apparently you never had to work with Virgil. So there's the selling. There's so many categories. You know, you have to be a director, an actor, a producer, a writer. Well, you don't have to be a writer anymore because now they force you to read their scripts. A stuntman. There's so many hats you have to wear, but the least important hat is the wrestling hat, you know. And so, but people don't get that, and they just want to, you know. And not only that, but man, when I got into business, it was a mark of honor if you were considered light, you know. That was a mark of honor, you know.
Right.
Like now guys are like, I want to work strong style. I'm like, why? I want to be tough. Well, if you want to be tough, then go into UFC. But this is supposed to, you know, after 10, 15 years, they're like, man, I wish I wouldn't have worked strong style. It's not about this. This business has nothing to do with toughness. I mean, you have to be tough to be in it because, you know, just the beatings you take. But you don't have to add any extra beyond and above and beyond, you know, infliction of stiffness, you know, other than TV where, you know, you need to lay it in, you know what I mean? But, or you need to at least be snug, you know, but it just, to me, I find it, you know, that people just don't get it, the business. I mean, and you can put it in and you can tell them, but it's that stupid saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him, you know, sell, or you can't make him, you know, work on his character.
You know, and the thing about it is, and I think you could attest to this, I mean, the business, to your point, is physical in and of itself. You can't defy the laws of gravity and physics. So you're going to get picked up, you're going to fall down, you're going to get knocked down, you're going to take bumps. All that stuff's going to add up like interest over time, and it collects, and you have a volume of it by the time, you know, your career's done. And then you fade off in the sunset, 5, 10, 15 years go by, you turn into an old dude, and you start feeling all that stuff. But I always like, and I worked snug or semi-stiff. No. Yeah, I kind of laid my stuff in, but I wouldn't look to strong arm anybody or try to shoot on anybody because I didn't know how. But my point is, like when I go back and watch two of my favorite guys of all time, you know, Flair's my favorite pro wrestler, and we'll get to yours, but I mean, when you look at Ricky Morton, you look at Bobby Eaton, everything they did looked great from a presentation standpoint. And when you locked up with them, it was a firm lockup. And all of a sudden they got a headlock on you, and it's like light as a feather, but it looks great on television. It looks great from the first row all the way up to row 100. And so that's why I always, you know, and Ricky Morton, while I'm on talking about him, for being such a small guy, he didn't fly around. And, you know, he didn't work like a cruiserweight. He worked a normal pro wrestling style. He worked main event style. And he sold his ass off. Ricky was one of the best sellers in the history of the business. And he also had great fire, and he would sell for anybody. But he was always going to get his stuff in. And a lot of people don't appreciate the magic of what superstar Bill Dundee did down there in the USWA. Bill was another guy who...
Ricky Morton. Let me tell you a Ricky Morton thing real quick.
Oh, go ahead. I love Ricky Morton.
You probably heard this then. He was working Ole Anderson, and he hit Ole Anderson, boom, 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 boom. Hit him with like 8, 9 punches, and Ole just kept shrugging him off. So then Ricky took a bump on his own, and for no reason, like, and so they get to the back, and Ole's like, "Why would you bump after hitting me 9 times?" He goes, "Somebody had to."
I've heard Ricky tell me that story, but and he made his point. Speaking of Ole and Arn, when you looked at Ole and Arn versus Arn and Tully, which combination was your favorite?
Here's the thing: is Ole and Arn is so far back for me that I don't remember it well enough. You know what I mean? So I can't really say. But
do you remember the Arn Tully stuff?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But it's weird. It's like my tastes have changed a lot too. Like, when as you get older, until you really learn main event style, you don't really get the business.
Okay,
and
describe main event style.
All right. Main event style is first of all, you have to have a character. I mean, how do you want me to how much in depth do you want me to describe?
No, just you're talking main event style. Just briefly for I know what main event style is, in my opinion.
I know. I'm saying, but like, you want me to go into in depth about? You got to have a character. You got to have the interviews, or just want me to explain it as basically the you have to be able to make the people believe in you. And then you have to be able to get a strong set of heat so that the people have sympathy. Because if there's no sympathy, it doesn't matter. I mean, the whole match is worthless. It's like if guys are told when they get to the gorilla position that they got cut 3 minutes, they start cutting and pasting high spots. And I'm like, just cut out the shine. Shine is so unimportant because it's not necessary. But the heat's entirely necessary. So you have to get a strong set of heat. But then when it's time to bump and fly, when it's time for the comeback, you have to bump and fly. But but you can't. To me, you can't describe main event style without going into the interviews and the characters and there's so much more to explain to it.
But also, I mean, to me, I think a main event style it can, from a moveset or a work standpoint, can involve many things, but I think cruiserweight in Japan is more readily accepted as a main event style. But I think main event style in the United States is more straight up wrestling or brawling, as Lawler did so successfully down in in USWA. And I know you're a huge Jerry Lawler fan, just like I am. I consider him to be one of the greatest of all times.
Yeah, but to me that goes without saying. Like to me,
but that was main event style, telling the story.
I've railed against high spot geteers for years because if the match, if they're just going bing, bing, bing like pinballs and nobody's selling, then all it does, it doesn't leave any sympathy, so you don't build any drama. Without any drama, you don't have any emotional attachment. Without an emotional attachment, you're not going to spend your change. You're not going to spend the money out of your wallet because it's hard earned. Now you might want to see it as dressed in the card, but you're not going to spend the money like you would for Mike Tyson or like for Dusty Rhodes. And so if you're not going to, it's the match. The main event obviously is the match that makes you want to pull the money out of your pocket. But you have to be emotionally attached. Like I always try to use the analogy of Happy Days. Like to me, Richie Cunningham was actually the main event on it. Everybody thought it was Fonzie because he was all cool and stuff. Or kind of like Kramer was on Seinfeld.
Right.
But once Richie left the show, the show basically once Richie left the show tanked in a couple years. But the ratings dropped precipitously, like right off the bat.
Yeah, because he was a white meat baby face.
The emotional glue. Yeah, he was the emotional glue that held the show together. Even though Fonzie was the glitz and the glamour, he was, and that's what made Dusty so good. Was Dusty was the glitz and the glamour, but because he sold, it gave you the emotional drama that made you cry. You know what I mean? It made you want to believe. It made you want to see him make that comeback. Same thing with Ricky Morton. The stories of him making girls cry aren't stories. I mean, they're not made up. They're not fiction. They're true.
Hey man, do you own or rent your home? Sure you do, and I bet it can be hard work. You know what's easy? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com.
And until you've actually felt that, it's like, until you've, I can give you that on a really, really minor scale. It's pretty funny. So I only, like, my first year in the business, not that I was working main event style, I was working jabroni style, but I was working with Don Bass in Memphis, and they have those, instead of a guardrail, they have stanchions and, like, the rope, but it's really more like a string.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Around the stanchions. Yeah. So he starts to put the string around my neck to choke me, and some fan grabs him to pull him off of me. So leave him alone. And then, of course, that makes him pull tighter and starts choking me out. So the lady's trying to help me, ends up choking me out just about, which isn't main event style by any stretch of the imagination. But the point being is that somehow what I was doing was making her emotionally, either she was somebody with mental difficulties, or she had gotten so emotionally involved in the match that she felt the need to actually intercede on my behalf. And that's the thing is, with a match where the moves are just moves and moves and moves and moves, and nobody's slowing down, which also I think is because of a lack of poise and a lack of grace in the ring. Like, you ever see when a guy will go to put his hands up in the air, like, yay, like, say, babyface or a heel. Babyface hits a big move and puts his arms up in the air, like, yay, for the big pop.
Right.
But as he's doing it, he starts walking around. Not like how you walk around when you're hitting your thing, because you're doing that because you're what's the word I'm looking for? You're showing off to all the corners, right? But when you're ready to hit your pose, you hit your pose to one side, boom.
Right.
Then you hit it to another side. But you watch guys with no grace and no poise, and as they raise their arms, as soon as they get their arms up, they'll turn to the other side, and just as the people are about to react, they'll turn to another side. And then just as they're about to react, because they don't know if the people are going to react properly, they don't know if the people are going to react good, bad, or worse with no reaction. So that way, they can't be hung out to dry because they never really stop for the pop. So in their mind, they don't put themselves out, and so they're not, they don't have to feel self-conscious. And that's part of the problem, is if you're doing moves nonstop. And that's one of the things I hated about Benoit, was when he was on offense, he was too self-conscious. I know I'm going to get a lot of crap for this, but I worked a lot with Benoit. And to me, he was an amazing seller, and, in the match where they put the title on him, like, I actually saw that because I was at a paid thing, at a paid appearance, and I was like, man, the way the match built, I go, if they're not putting the belt on him, they should call the audible and put it on him anyway. And then they put it on him anyhow, so it worked out perfect. But but offensively, he could never stop. He had to keep chopping and chopping and chopping and chopping. Luckily, he was the only one doing it, so it was okay. So it didn't seem. But if there was another couple guys doing the same thing that was over like he was, then all of a sudden you would see the flaws in it, because he never gave you a chance to sell. He never gave it. If you don't get a chance to sell, then how am I going to commit to the act of drama? And so he and then he would never have, like, I think he felt a lot of self-conscious because whenever he would pose half the time, or at least further back in his career, he would do the thing I was just talking about. And not that he wasn't an amazing athlete, and not that he wasn't amazing in Japan, and not that he wasn't a double murderer. So you have to take that into account too. But the whole thing is that, to me, I hated the fact that he would never let me sit because he was too self-conscious to gloat to the crowd, or to play what he did to the crowd. So I would have to, he would chop me in the corner and chop me, and I'd just have to drop to my knees and powder. and then figured I'd get a breather, but no, there he was right behind me, spin me around, chop, chop, chop. So, I mean, I made the most of it. But to me, and I know from what I've read, I know you were a big fan of working with him, so I'm curious to see your feedback. So that's why I'm kind of filibustering here.
No, you just got to but that's first of all, I loved working with Chris Benoit, and I was a huge fan. Especially, I thought his work really translated probably better in Japan than in the States.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he kind of outworked himself. And he worked too fast. And, working too fast normally is a sign of someone that is really green in the business. But Chris was a hell of a hand that could work anywhere in the world. He just liked to work fast. But when you do something to try to elicit a response, when you get that response, you respond accordingly. So if you knock somebody down, let that register that you've knocked somebody down because they've gone down for you. And then, you can pace around. There's times to hit the gas pedal. There's times to pull off. But you got to let people breathe in and grab hold of the fact that, hey, this guy's in trouble. And if you never stop chopping wood, you don't have the chance for the audience to get emotionally involved like they want to. So I'm not going to sit here and pick apart his work because he was premier. But Chris Benoit, I think, would have been even better than he was had he slowed down and let those moments breathe. And again, he's not here with us anymore, but, I'm just saying that would be my only critique of his work. Slow down and let the other guy, to your point, sell.
So let me, now that I've put the downside on him, as a Japan style, it was outstanding. And frankly, because he was he looked the part, he was believable in the part, it was okay because it worked in the sense that you have to have different things on the card. You always have to have different things on the card. So, that's why I said because there was only him, and I tried to tell guys that would work like him afterwards, I'd say, don't be like him. They go, but I want to be like Benoit. I'm like, only Benoit is going to be Benoit because he was missing a tooth. He had the look. He had the build. He was like a machine, and you believed in him.
Oh yeah, he was a machine. He was a Wolverine. But the thing about it is, I was over in Japan for 3 weeks. It was me, Arn Anderson, Ron Simmons, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, a couple of other guys, and me and Arn were about to go crazy because we were stateside guys, so we were drinking tons of beer. And all of a sudden, you go out there and you watch Chris work with either Jushin Thunder Liger or Malenko or Eddie. And they would just rip the place apart for like 20 solid minutes of badass wrestling and action and high spots. And you're sitting there thinking, dude, this is only my second tour of Japan. How do you follow that? And you know how you follow it?
Right.
You just go out there and you do your own thing because that's what they do, and you can't beat them at it. So you don't try to up your game to match them because you can't. So you stick to your same game plan. You do the same Stone Cold stuff or Stunning Steve, whatever I was back in. You do your same stuff. But I tell you what, when you first go over there, it was intimidating because you think, I got to do what these guys are doing. No, you don't. You do what you brought to the dance and what brought you there in the first place. You wrestle your own game.
And I think the reason he kept getting faster and faster was because he got more and more self-conscious and he couldn't stop because he didn't know how to stop. Because once you stop, all eyes are on you. And once all eyes are on you, you got to have something to do with yourself. Like I'd swing my hair out of my face and it would flop back in, so I'd push it aside with my hand and I'd snort my nose and I'd look around like I was thinking. But while I'm
that's that creative process that you're creating time for the audience to buy in and take heed to the fact of the damage that you've just done. You're killing time, but you're doing it in a creative fashion.
Yeah, you have to build time and space. It's like trying to teach guys, okay, when I bump you on the comeback, you need to bump and roll away from me and feed back in. So when you're coming in, there's distance between us. So something more could potentially happen. It's like I hate the fact that guys always reverse. Like every time somebody gets shot off the ropes, there's always a reversal. Man, back in the day, and not to sound like Vern Gagne, but back in the day, a reversal was a high spot because if you think about it, you shoot the guy off because you're in control. You're shooting him off because you're in control. He reverses it. You hit the ropes. All of a sudden, usually 9 times out of 10, the guy in the middle does the offensive maneuver. So all of a sudden, he's gotten a hook spot out of it. And so but what happened is guys just reverse to make it more convoluted and make it more what they think is quotation marks interesting.
Right.
But it's not. It just craps up. It just craps it up. And you'll never see me. Well, of course, I don't really work anymore, but you never really saw me reverse a guy and shoot a guy off and have him reverse unless I had a plan that was part of the drama, not just to be for high spot's sake, not just to make it, a mixed up, bag of nuts.
Okay, for the sake of the high spot, let's shift gears to the work that Shawn Michaels was doing. I consider Shawn to be, I think he's the greatest in-ring performer I've ever seen, just from a standpoint of being mechanically inclined to do everything, present it well, not kill anybody, never botch anything. So I think he's that good. But back in the day, it's funny when you watch pro sports.
Did you work him a lot?
When I first went to WWF, I was a ringmaster. Man, I wrestled Shawn, 3-4 nights a week for, a couple months.
I'm saying, but once you were Stone Cold, though, did you work him much?
No, not as much because, that's when he took time off. But my point is, people, you're talking about for the sake of the high spot. When I thought about Shawn Michaels back in the day, I wouldn't give him any credit. I'd say, high spot artist. Well,
but he wasn't, though.
No, I know that's what I'm saying. My point is, as soon as you got in the ring with him, you're like, well, that was the defensive side of me being a competitor and not wanting to put the guy over. But as soon as you lock up with him, it's like, and you go through 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes with him and do it for a couple of months, you're like, Jesus Christ, this is one of the baddest dudes I've ever worked with in my life. And so then you give him the respect after night one. But I wouldn't, because I was stuck on, he's a high spot artist because he was doing these awesome sequences, but he would also sell as well. So, but it took actually working with him in person for me to reverse my thoughts and think, hey man, this dude's one of the best of all time.
Yeah, he's an unbelievable athlete. And of course, me and Marty used to be really close as partner. And I've always, as you know, tend to open my mouth and be kind of, say what shouldn't be said, because it's just rude, so it's none of my business. And, me and Shawn were friends, but we got along anyway. And, but me and Marty were good friends. But I asked Shawn one day, I go, you're so freaking talented. How come when it's match and you're super beat up and the guy shoots you off, you don't run the ropes like you're beat up. You run them like you're fresh as a daisy. And he goes, I don't want the boys in the back to think I'm blown up. And I believed it. So I believe that's what he meant, too. I don't think he was BSing. But it's funny, though, But, yeah, he's amazing. But still, to me, the best worker of all time was the King, was Lawler. And of course, you're going to have to go back 10, 15, I don't even know how long you go back before to see real Lawler stuff. But Lawler was amazing. He was mind-bogglingly amazing. And not only that, but he did some stuff like, we talked about this last week or whatever, we were on the phone, but when Joe LeDuc picked them up, like they had this table that was like an iron table, like you couldn't break it to save your life. It wasn't going to break, and it was probably like 4 feet high because Lance Russell and Dave Brown would stand at it during the Memphis house shows, and it was probably a solid 10 feet away from the ring, and Joe LeDuc and Lawler obviously agreed to the spot. Joe LeDuc picks him up over his head like a press slam and throws him into the table. That was seriously a badass spot before there even were badass spots like that. But not just to show one side of him that you would never even think of the King doing. But his work was so extraordinary. His ability to get over, just his cleverness. Like he, one time he was working Razor Ramon, and Ramon would always throw the toothpick at the guy. So he throws the toothpick at the King. The King all of a sudden goes down like he's been shot. They come over, the referee comes over, Razor comes over to see what's going on. the King's holding the toothpick in his eye, like the toothpick went right in his eye. And what a brilliant way to get 4 minutes out of 4 or 5 minutes out of it. Instead of having a 4 or 5 minute match, which you got to have, where nobody really gets over because it's probably going to be a finish where nobody it's a disputed finish, or 50-50 booking. So what a way to get yourself over, to get the match over. It's why Jake Roberts was one of the only guys I could watch do squash matches once I got older, because his squash matches were interesting. I mean, he actually would take a jobber and go 5, 6, 7 minutes, and it'd be actually interesting to watch, and which is ridiculous because 2 points about that. One is I used to hate that guys that should have no business going more than 2 minutes, they would put them out there 10 minutes, just random, willy-nilly, it didn't matter. And then guys that could really go and have an interesting match with a jobber, they would have them go 2 minutes. I mean, there wasn't any rhyme or reason to who got picked, as opposed to looking at it and going, this guy can have a match with him, this guy can't, so this is the one that will go longer, this one won't. And finally, we were at Jake's like I'm a big fan of Jake. He's a big hero of mine. And his movie's fantastic. Anybody that's listening should see it. It really is fantastic. But a couple of years ago, I was on an indie show in Florida, me and Steve Carino, and Carino's a hell of a worker, too. Really no build whatsoever, but a hell of a worker. And so he, Jake has a match with some local job guy, because just they wanted to have Jake on the show and DDT somebody. But, more than just having them walk into the show and just DDT the guy, Jake decided he put on a wrestling clinic. Must have went 10, 15 minutes with this guy. Literally gave him one punch was the guy's comeback. And me and Carino just sat there with our jaws hanging on the floor. We were so mesmerized by how brilliant the work was. I mean, like, the amount of gaga he did, because there's good gaga and there's bad gaga. It's like mic work, Now everybody, at least for the longest time, every match got on the microphone. Just like every match got a valet. There's an art form to having a valet. There's an art form to talking on the mic. If your promo is my gauge is this: if the promo you cut is only as good as the guy in the front row, if the guy in the front row could cut the same promo, then it's not a very good promo. Right? I mean, if you're just going to say, "Let me tell you, when I'm coming to get you, I'm going to kick your butt," blah blah blah. That's not a good promo. And so Jake was able to make the match interesting, doing gaga and just stuff that was so intriguing, and taking his time with the guy, like, and then I can't even remember what he did, but I don't think anybody else in the business could have done it,
I love asking you questions, and then just the way you just go off on a tirade. I love it. But so when you say gaga, good gaga, bad gaga, now you've got to define to my listeners what gaga is.
Well, she's a singer now. She's starring on American Horror Story. No, the gaga is what you do. It's the Shakespeare.
Yes.
It's what you do between moves.
Correct.
It's
the filler.
It's the filler, but it's more than just.
It's the mannerisms. It's the actions.
But let me just say, but filler sounds like it's extraneous.
Right.
It's not. That's why I hate using that word. But it's like, okay.
It's character work.
Yeah. How long can you take from, like, if you bumped a guy, and then how long can you take, not that you want to take forever, but you don't want to just immediately pick him up and chop wood. So now you got to put it, like we talked about earlier, you got to put in a little effort. But if every time you bump him or whatever, and then you hit your pose to the crowd, well, that's going to get old too. So you have to think of other things besides hitting your pose, besides, standing around with your thumb up your butt, arguing with the ref, which one of my other pet peeves is when people touch the ref. I think if you have to touch the ref in any way, it's just, just a complete. Because if the ref has no control. I mean, if you get like guys in indie shows will just walk up, grab the ref, hey, look over there in a tag match, and then so they can do double team them behind the ref's back.
Well, that's bush league stuff. Stick to the gaga because the gaga is a two-way street, and with respect to buying time. So you and me are working. I give you the big bump.
We never work.
I know, and it's ridiculous. But so, okay, we're working now. I give you the big bump. Okay, I want to buy a little time creatively. I might adjust my knee brace. I might look at the front row. I might react to someone who said something. Then, by the same token, you know what time it is. You're going to buy time as well. I mean, you might have the big arch. You might have the big arch in your back. You might roll over for me. I might go to pick you up, and then if you move away from me, I mean, you're doing your thing, but we're both creating space and time before the next thing that we're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, you may walk over. I used to do this a lot. I'd walk over to the guy and I'd grab him by the hair, and then I'd pause some more and milk it. Because now it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, this is subconscious going on, but the people are like, oh, he's that close. If only the guy could hit him, and now, and the guy's on two knees. Now maybe the guy comes to one knee. And I'm still standing there because I'm still just kind of surveying the situation, and all of a sudden it builds up drama, and it's so, and then the other thing is, like, another thing I hate, another pet peeve is when guys will, like, let's say I slam you. Well, yeah, I'm never slamming anybody. I don't think I've slammed anybody in 25 years.
No, you just slammed me.
Yeah. So I slam you, and then and the next spot is me shooting you off the ropes. Well, most guys, 90% of the business, are going to lay there in the center and wait for me to pick them up and back them into the ropes. You're going to, because you know how to work, you're going to start making your way to the ropes like you're trying to get away from me and clear the cobwebs.
Right.
And then as you're climbing the ropes, as you finally get to your feet, it's too late. I'm there and I shoot you off. That way I never have to throw a punch that's just going to be shook off anyway, or because you're expecting me to shoot you off. So if I throw a punch, you're like, oh, crap, I was expecting to be shot off. I'll just shake it off and I'm ready to go. Or in guys, I hate when guys start throwing 5 punches while the guy's at the ropes. Because people sitting on the edge of their seats it's because it's real. When people are excited, they sit on the edge of their seat, and when they're not excited, they slunch back into their seat. And so if you're on the edge of your seat watching, you're like, oh yes, he's going to shoot them off. Something big is going to happen, or at least something potentially big is going to happen. And that's what so much of this is potential. And so it's like quantum physics. It's all about potential. And so you're sitting there, and then all of a sudden the guy punches him once, punches him twice, punches him 3 times. Now the fan slid back into his seat, and now he's leaning back against his chair, as opposed to sitting on the edge of his seat like he just was.
Yeah, because it wasn't spontaneous. Now, on the other hand, had I slumped over to the ropes, and maybe if you were giving me a blind feed and we're going to jam in, and maybe you were actually jacking with the crowd of Frog's Hair, and then when you turned in to reach for my arm, if I fire back 3 times and catch your ass and get you rocking, if you've had a little steam on me, bam, we got the people up. Boom, I go to shoot you in. If I go for the backdrop, whether you kick me or if it's the dreaded reversal, you catch me with an elbow at the ropes, boom, I go down, back to your shenanigans.
The reversal's okay. And a reversal, that's
correct.
Okay then, because that makes sense. That is telling a story that you had the advantage, you shot me off, but I had enough wherewithal because you only were able to hit me with 3 punches, and I had been dominating you long enough that when I reverse it, that's okay because it meant something.
It meant something and it made sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk. Well, what did you like so much about Lawler's work? Because I'm a huge Lawler fan, and I don't feel enough people give him credit for his work because you and I are 50 and 51 years old, so a lot of people didn't see Lawler work in his prime. They saw Lawler when he got to WWE, and he can still work his ass off to this day, but they know him more for his commentary work and how quick-witted he is on a stick. Lawler cut some of the best promos in the history of the business. And again, to your point, he was one of the greatest workers. But when you watch Lawler's work, everything made sense, no wasted motion, very economic, sold his ass off, tons of fire when it came time for fire. And when you look at his style, I mean, he wrestled a little bit, but he really was more of a stand-up brawler in a 6'1", 6'2", 215-pound body, and he drew money.
Yeah, absolutely. He drew tons of money. I mean, tons of money. Nothing but money. Nothing but dollars. Greenbacks. Dead presidents.
But, dude, you can bring that style back, and that style can still make money because it makes sense. And he was serious.
And one thing that I really loved was, and this is why I hate the fact that on indie shows everybody gets to talk on the mic, because guys don't know when enough's enough. They don't know, like the King knows when it's time to work, when it's time to talk, when it's time to gaga, when it's time to do whatever, because there's so many different little things that need to be done in a match or can be done, and you can't dwell on one forever at the expense of the others. It's like I wish people were able to work in a territory, because I worked for 2 years in Portland, where we worked literally no less than 6 nights a week, and sometimes 7, and we worked maybe 3 or 4 or 5 nights a week. The 2 years I was there, but they were made up by more than enough 7 nights a week. But but I learned to listen to a crowd, and when a crowd is cheering, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're totally behind you. It could mean like, okay, we're cheering because we're supposed to cheer. It's like aloha. Aloha means like 16 different things, in Hawaiian. It could mean hello, it could mean goodbye, it could mean screw you, it could mean I'm hungry, or I don't know. I don't really speak Hawaiian, so I don't know. But it can mean a lot of things. And so does an audience's clapping, and so does their response. So guys will always think, well, as long as they're responding, that means I can keep going. Well, it doesn't, because sometimes they're just doing it to be nice, and you have to be able to hear that. And you think to yourself, how the hell can you possibly hear that? And I don't know, but I learned because I got to work with some great veterans. I got to work with the grappler basically and pick his brain every night for 2 years in Portland. Who at 19 or was 20, he was on top for Watts. And he actually beat Andre and somebody else in the same it was a handicap match or something, and he actually Watts like Andre the Giant and somebody else, and for Watts to put that kind of heat on a guy who was only 5'10", 240, that's saying something. You know what I mean?
What's better than courtside seats? Free sports on Pluto TV. Hey sports fans, get all your sports free on Pluto TV. Pluto TV is your home for sports. Watch 24/7 channels of MLB, MLS, MMA, sports news and analysis, plus documentaries, TV shows, and movies, all for free. No signups, no fees, no contracts, ever. Download the free Pluto TV app on any device.
And when you're talking about the grappler, you're talking about the man named Len Denton. And so this guy was one of the veterinaires that you got a chance to pick. Me, on the other hand, I didn't get a guy who had the reputation that Len Denton had. But, one of the guys that I gravitated towards was Gorgeous Gary Young, who was an outstanding mechanic and a hell of a damn worker. He just never got a big break. But, man, the dude was smart, and I'd go down the road and pick his brain. But I'm going back to you here. Gary, and along with Chris Adams, and Danny Davis down there in Tennessee and USWA, and started helping me learn to listen to the crowd. And then once I got a taste of listening to that crowd, then I was like, okay, now I get it, because I'm trying to control these people, and if you're going to be successful, you must. So how long did it take for you to listen to the people and then be able to read them and make heads or tails of the psychology of the business and go from 101 to the multifaceted level, which is money?
Well, I learned how to listen to the people in Portland. I think by the time I got to ECW, I knew how to draw money. And although I did draw some money in Portland, but, but I still wasn't at that level yet. I still, I know I wasn't at that level yet, but I was over enough that I put some asses in some seats. They weren't actually at the arena. They were at the, local, but no, but I think I finally put most of it together by the time I got to ECW. I was going to say something else. But listening to that crowd, it's like, you know, if I tried to explain, I don't think I could explain how you can hear so many different things in a crowd noise, even though to anybody else it's going to sound just like noise. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah, the interesting thing to me is getting the feedback, processing it, and then making a decision to go elsewhere. And then on the fly say, oh, no, man, here's a good spot for the heat. Or, you know, man, piss on the heat. Let's fire this thing up for a little bit of a comeback. And, you know, just reading the crowd, listening to the crowd. And to me, that was like, man, that was the part of the match that really got me high was, you know, being able to have that relationship with the crowd, respond accordingly, and nail it. And sometimes, you know, even as a veteran, you can jack it up and lose it. And sometimes I'll never forget working at the Sky Dome in Toronto. It was a real big building. And, man, when the bottom fell out of that place, you really felt bad because you just couldn't get them back again. And it's a horrible feeling when you lose a crowd. But, you know, most of the time, when you're on top, you're batting 900. You know, you got to be able to do it almost every single time you went out. Yeah. You said ECW. Now, this is coming on the heels of your WWF and your WCW run, right? Because
when I was in WWF, I was Johnny Polo, and I worked in the office. You know, I had an office across from Pat and Bruce, you know, in the Titan Tower on the 4th floor. And then I went to WCW, and that's when we all rode together. Then I went back to Memphis. Like the Hotel California, you could check out, but you can't ever leave. And then I went to New York, and then I went to ECW. But by then, I kind of put the pieces all together. You know, I hadn't completely put the pieces together, and maybe you never put the pieces completely together.
Right.
You know,
interesting.
Because because your opinion's going to change. Like I remember, like at first, the Piper Greg Valentine dog collar match. I think the first time I saw it, I was like, I'm not so impressed because there weren't a lot of high spots and stuff, and that's what I liked when I was younger, you know. And then I got impressed with it, and then I got to the point in my career where I was like, everything had to be like, you know, I wanted to be smooth, Brad Armstrong smooth,
right?
You know what I mean? And so then I didn't like it again. But by the time I got to ECW, I was like, man, this is what a match, you know?
Right.
What I mean, and that's what I've maintained to this day. But I think, you know, you're always going to have little fluctuations, but the basic jive of the story is never going to change again. You know, once you reach a certain point, you know, you're going to have, unless you have like, let me think, let's take an example. Unless they knock the soul out of you, like, you know, when you go to New York and they don't use you the way you feel like you should be used, and they literally take the heart out of you, and then you start to question everything you do. And, you know, then you hear people saying, well, you know, if you know, Lonzo, one of the agents, you know, he'll write good reports if you act like, you know, you need his help. So then you find yourself asking him questions that you knew 5-10 years ago the answer to, just to try and stay relevant. And then you're more depressed because now you feel ashamed that you even did such a, you know, a tawdry act of such a shameless asking, you know, to try and get on his good side, you know, and he didn't even like me anyway. So it was just like, so, but I think at that point, it doesn't really matter what you know because you're not going to get a chance to use it. And so I was glad so I guess I put myself off on a side note here on a tangent, but I guess I was glad that I got to end my career. You know, TNA wasn't the place I wanted to, you know, finish my career, but at least I got to finish it on top, you know, for the majority of my time there, you know, so that's a whole other side point, but I forgot what the question was.
Well, it was just about, you know, when you really learned how to read a crowd, and it really wasn't back until you got to ECW after you'd run through, you know, WWF, you came through WCW, and you were having really good matches then, and we were all traveling together. That's all we did when we went down the road was talk about the business. And, you know, I think
I got to tell you something. I never told you this. I got to tell you this. Well, when we used to ride together, me and Pillman knew we were too small for ECW. So, we figured if we could be a tag team, then we could, we'd have a good career longevity, and you obviously wanted to stay a single, and so that's what we talked about. And then they end up making you and Pillman a tag team, and then I got, let go like a couple months later. And, but I remember that, what was it? I think, maybe it wasn't this early, but it was like me and Pillman had some really, really, it was either a pay-per-view or something where we had like this stellar match, and everybody put it over, man. We were like, wow, it was a great match. And then the next day it was like a TV taping, and you and Pillman had like a better match by like light years ahead. And I was like, man, that's just depressing.
Yeah, that was the thing about it back then. Riding around, I wanted to be a singles wrestler my entire career because, as a tag, you got to depend on another guy. If he goes down with an injury or whatever, then you're screwed because you figure in as a tag team. Classic cases. What's that?
Share the glory.
Yeah.
Share the glory.
Yeah, and almost split the paycheck sometimes. But anyway, so they end up putting me and Brian together, and then all of a sudden it was like, wow, because I love tag team wrestling. But I wanted to be a singles wrestler. But all of a sudden you start wrestling. When you got 4 guys out there and 6-mans, they get a little convoluted. There can be good 6-man matches, but a pure 4-man tag with a great referee, all the pieces out there that you can mess with and, pull that referee, with good heels and manipulate things. Blind tags, just all the different things you can do. That's when I really fell in love with tag team wrestling was after, teaming up with Brian. And of course he came up with the idea of the gold chains, all the BS. But my point is that's when I fell in love with tag team wrestling. And as a spectator today, it's just hard to find, great tag team wrestling like there was so many years ago when there was territories and established teams who made their whole careers out of being a team. So it would only stand to reason. I'm not knocking today's current tag teams. I'm just saying there's no way you can compare them to guys that spent their whole career in a tag team.
I think there's 2 reasons for that. I think it's actually all based off of one reason is that, WWE's always seen a tag match as 4th or 5th in the top. So they were never going to push them as main eventers. So the best talent was never going to go into a tag situation. Whereas in the South, tag match, I'm doing cardio now, so I may be out of breath. If I am, I'll have to stop doing cardio. But in the South, tag teams were revered, and they were used as main eventers. Some of the biggest drawing houses ever, like in the Carolinas, were tag team matches. So it's just a different atmosphere. But I concur with you. I think there's I'd much rather be a single. But there's on a regular basis, to me, in a perfect world, I'd be a single on TV and I'd work tags on the road. Because tags, there's such a higher level of creativity in some ways because there's more people. But also, I'm lazy. So that kind of suits me personally, so.
What are you doing for cardio?
I'm running a 4-minute mile.
Dude, it's almost 9 p.m. there. You're just now doing cardio?
Yeah.
What are you doing with your workouts these days?
Well, wait, I'm sweating balls because I don't want to turn the fan on because then you won't be able to hear me. So I'm like, I'm really dripping sweat bad.
All right, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we wrap up the podcast here, and then I'd like to come back and talk to you, and we'll go Unleashed, and I want to talk about the creation of the Raven character and your time in ECW and focusing on that window of things that were going on there and how you came up with that character and the promos that you were dropping because, man, there were some heavy promos being delivered there and yours were among the best. And, dude, you were there. You were in that locker room. So there was a lot of guys that you were doing business with and working with in some of the angles. So I'd like to take some time to research that and have you back on the Unleashed show where I know I love listening to you talk about the business, but you and I cuss a lot. So I think when we take the filter off of you, I think it'll be even better. Are you down with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, but here's the thing too is, I don't cuss if I'm in an environment where I'm not supposed to, but because I'm at home, and I'm putzing around the house and I'm talking to you, I forget that I'm in an environment where I'm not supposed to curse. You know what I mean? So, it's funny, that it's very easy to put a dichotomy between cursing and non-cursing, when you know you need to. But it's also the elements of your location and being on the phone and whatever. So it's much easier if I'm on the phone. If we're in person and I have to not curse, I can do that. But on the phone, it's going to be, too many F-bombs.
And, here's the funny thing about the business before we go on this note. And when you go into the finish room, for some reason, I don't care who you are, for some reason, there must be every cuss word known to the history of man is used in the finish room. And just because, I don't know, somehow those words best fit into the description of the emotions and the setup that you're trying to make to affect these people. Wouldn't you concur that? And most of the boys cuss. I mean, there's some guys that don't. And on this show, this is my family-friendly show, but just with respect to finishes, that's where the cussing starts.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, when I was in WCW, like I knew I had to protect my character because I didn't have Paulie protecting me like in ECW, and back then, like me and Sullivan didn't get along like we do now. So he'll tell you whatever, but so. He used to, him and Terry Taylor were the bookers, and they would come bring me in for the finish, and they'd go, all right, we got this laid out, and, maybe me going under this week. And I'm like, well, that's a good idea. I go, but what about this? And I'd lay out some other idea with me going over, and I'd give a reason, which they couldn't argue with because it made logical sense. Instead, they'd say, okay, we'll do that then. And I told Canyon, Canyon's like, how do you do that? I go, the thing is, you can't leave once you left the room, you can't go back in and ask for it to change.
Right.
You have to, on the fly, come up with something better that makes sense, because otherwise they'll say, oh, no, we already sent it to the truck. It's already in the thing. We can't change the finish now. So eventually it became Terry Taylor would always tell, whoever was trying to get me, go find Raven so we can suggest the finish.
But it wasn't that you were adverse to doing jobs. It's just you had a better answer, and if it was logical, great. But and that was the key, because back in the day, and Triple H has gone on record as saying this, and he wasn't talking out of school. It was true. Sometimes when I'd go to work or whatever, if I didn't like the finish, and dude, I was always a reasonable guy. I was always going to put somebody over when it was time to. But if I didn't like the finish, I'd say, no, F that. We're not doing it. And I'd leave the room. I would never offer a solution. And so, sometimes I was a little bit hard to work with from that respect. But when you approach it, and so if there's anybody out there listening, don't approach it the way I did back in the day for a period of my career. Approach it the way Scott's telling you to, with a logical alternative that does make sense. And the chances of it getting shot down may still be high, but you're not taking yourself out of the game. You're not slamming the door and just walking away saying, no, we're not doing that. Find a different way. You're trying to solve the solution, the task at hand, and, maybe get yourself over. It doesn't matter as long as the match gets over. Both people get over, but you provide an alternative.
I think in defense of you, though, I think you never expected that kind of pressure on you, and the pressure had to be exorbitant, because you're carrying the company on your back, so...
But some of the times I was so amazed at the things that they wanted to come up with. I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, come on, man.
Like the Brock Lesnar thing.
Yeah, that was...
How could you lose to Brock Lesnar in your very first match on TV without having without a build-up and a pay-per-view? Sure, get your ass handed to you. Go out there and get your ass handed to you for 5 weeks in a row. Whatever, but don't just beat you in a match for no reason other than petty reasons. Which I understand is probably why you would, go F no. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the bad thing about that was I knew Brock was money back in the day when I first met him. And me and the guy are friends, and we've always been friends. But it's like that wasn't a good business decision. Now, of course, on a personal or business decision, I handled it in the worst way I could by just saying, well, that's when I effectively quit, and I was gone for 6 or 8 months or whatever it was. But, hell, that, was basically career suicide for almost anybody. I lost a lot of money. The company lost a lot of money. I got it was just a bad part of my life that I handled in a horrible fashion. And if I could go back, it'd be one of the things I'd redo. But yeah, man, I mean, sometimes the finishes were just so ludicrous, it was unbelievable.
Do you think if you would have said, I'm not doing it, but come up with something else and I'll do it, they would have said yes, or were they just dead set on it happening?
No, for some reason, I was running up down the road, and I was in Columbus when Jim Ross called me with the creative. And, back in the day, I was drinking a lot of whiskey. And then he laid out the finish for me, and I was laying in a hotel room. I was going to work Columbus, Georgia with Ric Flair that night in the cage. And I said, if that's creative, I ain't going to be there. And so, he told me to call Vince, and I called Vince, and we had the same conversation. And, I always hate to talk to people on the phone. I would much rather be talking to you in person. But that night when I had that conversation at 2 a.m. with Vince and said, he laid the exact scenario out for me. I said to him, so that's what we're doing, huh? And he goes, yep. And I was like, I was like thinking, okay, like, well, yeah, well, unless you don't like it, Steve. He didn't say that. So I'm just like, oh, really? Okay. Well, then F you. And that's when I, took my ball and went home, and the big smear campaign, started. But because I couldn't see that guy, I couldn't see his eyes, and because I was, quick to make a decision back then, and a bad one. So I blew that one. And that was on me.
I don't know. See, to me, if they were doing that, no matter what, then I think you did the right thing. I mean, because sometimes you got to take your ball and go home, but only when you're carrying the ball. When you're in the rest of the card and you're not carrying the ball, it's a lot different. Things aren't. But if you were making all the money for the company, that's just a silly piece of petty booking. So, I don't think you made the wrong decision.
Well, but here's the thing. Here's the thing. I could have handled it better. Rather than just not showing up at the building, I got on an airplane and went home. It was the fact that I could dispute the finish was, a valid point. But I didn't dispute it. I just said, hey, F you. Well, I didn't even say that. Yeah. I kayfabed him. I said, I'm going home. I did a walkout. It was a horrible strategic business move on my end. End of story. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back. I'm going to do some research, watch some stuff, because, dude, you and me have been friends for a long time. And how this podcast happened, it's like, man, we traveled together for a couple of years, and then we always got along in the business, and we hit it off for some reason as soon as we met. Maybe it's a similar sense of humor. And then, man, we traded a couple of phone calls over the years, and then I tried to call Scott a couple times and never left a voice message, and he left a voice message, and it was a big just miscommunication or lack of communication or perceived heat. And I was down there in Atlanta, I was 100 miles out of Atlanta filming a show for CMT, and I said, man, I got to talk to Scott. I'm 100 miles away from him. I'm going to give him a call. So anyway, that's how we finally got in touch. You're one of the oldest guys I've known, and the longest guys I've known in the business, and we're both still alive. And through all the stuff we went, that's a good thing. So I'm glad to be talking to you, and I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much.
All right, dude. Good talking to you.
You too, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, man, do you own or rent your home? Sure you do, and I bet it can be hard work. You know what's easy? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com.
What's better than courtside seats? Free sports on Pluto TV. Hey, sports fans, get all your sports free on Pluto TV. Pluto TV is your home for sports. Watch 24/7 channels of MLB, MLS, MMA, sports news and analysis, plus documentaries, TV shows, and movies, all for free. No signups, no fees, no contracts, ever. Download the free Pluto TV app on any device.
This week on Bowling with Favre, we got a good friend and one of the biggest musicians in the world, Darius Rucker.
Darius has been asked, either in a bar, in the airport, wherever, hey, give me a little bit of Hootie.
I was asked that last night at the bar. But I said no last night.
And coming up on next week's show, Tuesday the 23rd, we're joined by the legendary Dr. Phil. Subscribe now everywhere you get your podcasts or stream the show for free at PodcastOne.com.